They never saw it coming. The sun was barely up when the wagons rolled into the canyon, their wooden wheels groaning beneath the weight of supplies. Dust clung to the boots of the soldiers on foot, their rifles slung low, eyes heavy from days on the march. Ahead of them, the Pawnee scouts moved in silence. There was no wind, no sound but hooves and creaking leather and the faint cries of women and children trailing behind. Then a single gunshot cracked through the stillness, and the hills erupted. From the canyon walls, a wave of gunfire poured down. Warriors burst from behind rocks and ridges, Sioux horsemen racing the length of the trail, war cries echoing through the narrow pass. The Pawnee never had a chance to form a line. The soldiers shouted, scrambled, returned fire where they could, but it was too late. The Sioux had the high ground, and the advantage of surprise. What began as an escort mission for the Pawnee turned into a slaughter. This was September 1873. The U.S. Army had dispatched a column from the Indian Agency at Genoa to accompany a band of Pawnee on their buffalo hunt. For centuries, the Pawnee had hunted the plains freely. But now, with their population weakened by disease, displacement, and war, they traveled under military escort, unarmed and vulnerable, dependent on rations and goodwill. The route took them through a stretch of southern Nebraska known as Massacre Canyon, an open ravine flanked by shallow hills. It was the perfect place for an ambush. The Sioux had been watching for days. Some say it was revenge. Others say it was desperation, a final attempt to assert control over the dwindling plains as U.S. expansion closed in from all sides. But whatever the reason, the attack was swift and overwhelming. Pawnee families were cut down where they stood. Mothers clutched children and ran blindly through the brush. Elders stumbled behind wagons or crawled into ravines to hide. Some tried to circle back toward the soldiers, hoping the blue coats might offer protection. But the line had already collapsed. By the time the first volleys quieted, the ground was littered with the dead. The soldiers, perhaps 50 in total, were caught off guard and outnumbered. Many held their position as long as they could, some dragging wounded behind wagon wheels, others firing from prone positions in the dirt. Their orders had been to protect the Pawnee, but the truth was, they were barely able to protect themselves. And then came the knives. Eyewitness accounts later described scenes of unimaginable violence, scalping, dismemberment, and the slaughter of women and children. The Sioux made no distinction between warrior and non-combatant. They were there to destroy. At the height of the chaos, a handful of Pawnee and soldiers managed to flee, some downriver, others straight into the brush. They carried with them the wounded and the dying. They carried what stories they could. By day's end, the canyon ran red. Estimates vary, but more than 70 Pawnee were killed that morning, many of them unarmed, most of them civilians. It was one of the last major intertribal battles on the Great Plains, and it marked a brutal full stop to centuries of indigenous conflict in a land that no longer belonged to them. The Sioux faded into the hills before reinforcements could arrive. The army never pursued. The dead were buried quickly or left for the crows. Years later, a monument was erected. It still stands there in the quiet grass, far from the sound of war, far from the families who never came home. But when the wind cuts through that canyon, some still say you can hear the echoes, shouts, hooves, a single shot in the distance, and then silence. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.